So before we get started, hopefully you will have all received a link to the RStudio Cloud project space for this workshop. If you haven't done so already, if you could follow the steps that are outlined on the screen currently to get yourself set up ready for the interactive part of the workshop. That way, just in case anyone has any problems accessing the project, then Andras, who's watching the chat at the moment, will be able to step in and help with any technical difficulties. So I'll just leave that up for a couple more minutes, just for people who might still be arriving or might have just arrived. And if anyone hasn't received the link, could you let us know in the chat as well, so that we can get that sorted as soon as possible. Hopefully Andras is monitoring the chat.
Seems like an admin thing as well. I don't think.
Would they be able to do what? Sorry, like they own the.
I don't think that was a question. I think that was someone just not muting themselves. Hopefully. So I'm going to get started anyway now. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're the first workshop of the conference, so that's quite exciting. I'm Anna Powell. I'm a data scientist in the BNSSG CCG. And Andras, who is going to be doing the main bulk of this workshop, has been working with us as a developer for the last year. So we're really happy to be here. Back in 2019, we actually ran a workshop at the NHS-R Conference on population segmentation. And at the end of that workshop, as part of a survey, we asked if people would be interested in a PHM Population Health Management Analytics Suite. And 31 out of the 33 respondents to that question answered yes. So here we are 2 years later with such a tool. So we were lucky enough to secure funding from the Health Foundation for their Advancing Analytics funding call. So Andras has been employed on that, and he's been working on the PHM ExploreR for the last year. Just to say before we start, so the tool is nearly finished. We have an anticipated final rollout date of February next year. And at the end of this presentation, at the end of this workshop, we'll be sending around a survey, which would be hugely grateful if you could fill in. And as a bit of an incentive, if you leave your email address, we'll be able to contact you with an early release of the tool for you to use, hopefully, in your work. So yeah, that's where we are. And I'm gonna just do, well, this is the schedule for the workshop, and I'm just going to start off with a brief introduction to population health management and the tool as it stands at the moment, and then we'll get into the meat of the workshop with Andras giving us an interactive run through of the Shiny tool. So this is a rough schedule, and this is subject to change. And just to say, we're really keen that this is an interactive workshop. So if anyone does have any questions as we go through, whether that be technical issues or questions about the functionality of the tool, please pop those in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And Andras will pause at the end of each section to cover any specific questions. And then at the end, we'll have time for more general questions. Okay, so I imagine a lot of us who work in the NHS will have some idea of what population health management is. It's one of those terms that's fairly hard to define. So I've put up a few different definitions on the page here. And I just wanted to give a bit of context around this. So quite amazingly, only around 20% of a person's health outcomes are attributable to their ability to access good quality healthcare. And the other 80% are made up of what's often referred to as social determinants of health. These include things like health-related behaviours, socioeconomic factors, and environmental factors, such as where people are living, for example. And population health has come about following this realisation that there are lots of other things that affect health outcomes. And it's really a proactive approach that aims to improve both physical and mental health outcomes and reduce health inequalities by including these so-called wider determinants of health in both management, planning and delivery of healthcare. So that's a kind of broad summary of what we're trying to do with population health management. And the sort of analytics side of population health management involves the use of linked data to design new models of proactive care to deliver improvements in health and well-being, which make the best use of collective resources. So that might be data from local authorities, healthcare data, and data from community service providers as well. And ultimately, what PHM is trying to do is to deliver on the NHS long-term plan's goal to move from delivering care that mainly responds when somebody becomes unwell to a system of targeted early intervention and prevention. So whilst there's definitely, whilst there's definitely a growing awareness of the value of population level analysis across the NHS, as is always the case when we're adopting a change in approach to tackling a large scale issue, there are some key challenges which are faced by organisations looking to embed PHM in their ways of working. And I've just kind of summarised a few of these on this slide here. So one of these is the availability of linked data. So I said in the previous slide that PHM really does require data from across the health and social care system. So this might be local authority and community-based data. So we need a way of linking up the data feeds from these different providers to enable population health management analysis. And this is becoming more common. So in our system now, we have a record level linked data set for our entire population, which includes primary care demographic information as well. So things are starting to change on that front. There's also issues around technical capability. So this is a new approach for analysts as well. And it's a move away from more kind of routine reporting. But certainly in our department, there really is an appetite for developing new ways of approaching this issue. And I think people are really keen to learn new techniques and develop their analytical abilities to be able to focus on PHM more in their daily work. Another issue, as is quite often the case with all analytics, is the availability of clearly defined questions. So because this approach represents a culture change, it's going to take time for people to start asking the right questions to address the challenge. And that's in terms of being really clearly defined, and this shift in focus towards a more proactive, preventative approach. And then another key issue, as always in the NHS, is time. So learning these new skills, embedding this new approach is going to take time, and time is a limited resource in the NHS. So what we're hoping is that the tool that Andras is going to talk you through today, the PHM ExploreR, is a way to start to address some of these issues. And on the next slide, I've just summarised some of the key benefits that we see of our tool, and hopefully by the end of this workshop, you'll agree with some of these benefits. And please do let us know if you think there's anything that we could improve on. So the PHM ExploreR is an open source tool. That means it's available to anyone. The source code is going to be, well, it currently is available on GitHub, and future versions will also be uploaded there. So we're really keen for this to be available to everybody. And we've really tried to tread the quite difficult line between making the tool as flexible and customizable as possible to try and meet organizations' specific needs, while also keeping it as user-friendly as possible. So this has been a challenge, and it would be really great to get your feedback at the end of this workshop on how well you feel that we've managed to balance these two priorities. And then just kind of referring back to some of the challenges that I talked about on the previous slides. So we're hoping that some of the limitations around technical capability, asking targeted questions, and time will be aided by this tool. So we're hoping that this is going to be a really easy to use tool that will enable clinicians, managers, and analysts to interrogate large linked data sets and produce really nice, easy to interpret data visualizations. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do with this tool. And Andras is going to spend time going through each part of the tool's functionality. So I'm not going to talk about this too much, but these are the kind of key areas that we've tried to focus on in terms of the functionality of the tool. So we have a section which enables us to look at population demographics. So the age of the population, the sex of people in the population, and things around deprivation, etc. And we've also embedded capability for population segmentation. So that's carving up our entire population into specific segments with defining characteristics. We've also tried to embed some functionality that enables risk stratification, and Andras will talk about that some more. And then one of the things that I'm really excited about is the ability to look at patient pathways. So this is activity of individual patients over time, and Andras will hopefully show some really nice graphics that I think are something that this tool is doing for the first time. So hopefully that will be really useful to you in your work. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to hand over to Andras. And just a reminder that if you do have any questions, or if you want us to slow down, if you're having any technical problems, then just give us a shout in the chat and I will try and get Andras's attention and we can go from there. So we'll stop sharing like this and hand over to Andras.
Thank you, Anna. I am going to start off, as mentioned, just by talking through the data, first of all, that the ExploreR uses. So apologies for having to sit through another presentation. As previously mentioned, the ExploreR uses linked data. In particular, we have two tables that will be looking at attributes and activity. They are linked by the patient ID field, although I will in most cases just refer to it as ID. This data set is 10,000 individuals that we basically constructed synthetically from the system-wide data set that we have here in the BNSSG. So there shouldn't be any problems with sharing this. The data format that I'll be generally referring to, so in general, you can either have CSV or RDS tables. RDS, for those not familiar, is a data format that's native to R in which we wrote the ExploreR. I personally like it just because it's a little bit easier to handle than CSV files and is just a bit more compact. The attribute table has a row per patient, so it has 10,000 rows, and we start off with the ID, and then going across, we have the various attributes of this individual. Generally, we have demographic, clinical, and socioeconomic attributes. It might be worth mentioning that each of the column headers, with the exception of ID, has a prefix just to tell the ExploreR which of these categories the column belongs to. The minimum data that we actually have, we've kind of tried to make this table as compact as possible. but the minimum data that we do need to include for the ExploreR to work is information about sex, age, ethnicity, deprivation, at least one geographical field. So this could be anything from PCNs to locality, and at least one clinical condition. For example, whether an individual has hypertension, had a stroke, etc. This table is then linked to the activity table, which, unlike the attributes table, doesn't have a row per patient. Instead, it has an activity event per row. This activity could be anything from an individual being admitted to A&D, visiting a GP, picking up a prescription, really anything that means that they have interacted with healthcare services. The structure here is a little bit different, is a bit more set than it is in the attributes table, where there is some amount of flexibility of just what fields you actually include. We start off with some points of delivery, which are character fields designed to split the activity into particular types. So, for example, here you can see that the first point of delivery or pod level here is secondary. You can see that we then have further pod levels just to stratify this, which is somewhat useful in some of the later functions when we'll be wanting to effectively select particular types of activity to view. In addition to the points of delivery, we also have arrival dates, departure dates, specialty or some description of more detail of what the actual activity instance was about, and then finally cost. We also have the IDs at the very front just to link us back to the activity table. To some extent, there is the most flexibility that we have in this setup is actually about the points of delivery. There is the only requirement is that you have at least one column for it, but generally we would recommend that you just include as many as is convenient. I am going to now switch over to the actual, which hopefully everyone has managed to set up. I am very briefly going to actually talk about how it is that we loaded, and then we will get on with most of the interaction. So the first part that I'm going to talk about, no one is supposed to click along because due to limitations in actually sharing the source files, I haven't managed to. So please, just for this part, do just follow along. And then once I'm done with this, everything that I do, you will be able to follow. So hopefully everyone has managed to get to this landing screen. Apologies for clicking off it for just a minute. I just have to go and get it set up. Hopefully everyone has managed to get to this screen. The way that you upload the files is you just simply select the upload files button here in this first box. This page would look a little different if I didn't have any data loaded, but as I mentioned, I did already begin by just getting some of it set up. So once again, you can click it, but you won't be able to upload the files because I haven't shared them with you. In short, you upload the two files that I just described. Unfortunately, it seems that it is taking quite a while to upload because the files are stored locally, and to actually use them, I have to upload them to the RStudio cloud. So please do just give it a moment. In the meantime, what I'm going to talk about is just the general structure of each of these pages. At the top, we have a little bit of information about what page we are on. We then have the main content of each page, which will be in a series of boxes here in the center. And then there is some useful text here on the right-hand side to tell you what the actual page is about, or just to give some advice to explain some things that might not be clear. So for example, here on the landing page, we just have some links. We just have some information about that. We recommend that you actually read the links on the right-hand side. There are some points about terminology that I will be mentioning in just a minute, and just generally about the ExploreR. So please do just give this another 30 seconds to upload.
Andreas.
Yes.
Are you able to just show the first steps again? We've got a question. Please, could you explain the steps before this stage? So I think that might refer to the actually accessing the R Studio Cloud.
Right. I can show those steps certainly. So I don't have your presentation up at the moment, but in short,
Should I share it?
I can just really quickly open it and it will be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So this page is going to look a little different for everyone else, but in principle, if you have managed to log yourself into the link that I put in chat, you will need an RStudio account for it. But once you have done so, just click New Project here and then select New RStudio Project. This will take about a little bit of time to load. So please do just wait about half a minute to a minute for it to load. So apologies that it's not any faster. But once it has loaded, it will generally put you into an environment that is somewhat similar to this. In the right-hand side, you can then see a series of files. Select app.r, just click it once. This will then open this file here in the center or top left of these grids. And then here in the top right, there will be an option that says Run App, which if you click, it should hopefully open you up onto this page. I do also just want to briefly mention that if you open this page and then you don't really interact with it for a couple of minutes, it will close, in which case just click, if there is a red button here, click it and then just run it again using Run App. And then that should return you back to this landing page. Hopefully that answers the question. If you still need help, then please do let us know, and then we will help. We will make sure that you can get to the landing page. Just to carry on, so having uploaded both of the files, we then really quickly just basically make sure that the column headers are approximately what we would expect, which is to say that it has all of the prefixes that I mentioned. This is mostly just relevant so that we don't end up with erroneous data in the ExploreR, which can cause bugs. Then the next page is basically just pointing it out to all of the corresponding columns that I mentioned. So selecting age, sex, whatever primary deprivation measure you have, ethnicity, and then some geographical area field, as well as all of the clinical conditions, which of them are long-term conditions, and of these long-term conditions, which are simple, which are complex, and the wider determinants, in which case I've also included the index of multiple deprivation in there, just because it's related. The second box is for defining bridges to health definitions. Depending on how complicated a definition that you would like to be using, I would recommend that you just effectively calculate it and then include it in your data, because it's much easier to just come here, select the corresponding field, and then select the value that corresponds to each of the segments. This does look a little bit silly because I didn't name them identical, but unfortunately, once again, due to some technical limitations, in order to keep things simple, we didn't really want to include a very complicated screen for selecting each of the segment categories, definitions. So I basically recommend that you just calculate it, include it in your data, and then for each of these segments, you just select the corresponding field, which I just named Bridges to Health. You select, and then you just select which of the segment belongs to. Once you've done that, at the bottom, just click Go, and then that should hopefully pre-calculate a couple of multi-morbidity measures that we just selected, and then land you right back at the landing page on the screen that I now have up. I have a couple of red points in my chat, but I can't see it. And do we have any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if it might be worth just taking a brief pause just to make sure that everyone's managed to get to the landing page.
Yeah, so if anyone hasn't, then please let us know now, because from this point on, everything is going to be interactive and hopefully everyone will click along. So I am just going to pause here for a minute to make sure that everyone does manage to catch up. If someone can't get it to load it, please let us know now.
And just to clarify, the data should be preloaded for you. So there's no need to go through the data loading. Okay, someone's saying the browser shows the PHM ExploreR heading, but nothing else loads.
Well, that is a little unusual.
If someone has managed to access the same page that Andras is, okay, so working for me, have both data sets preloaded. Okay, maybe the people that don't have it loaded could try reloading it.
Yeah, so let's just try restarting it. So if you do have it up, so if you just go to this page, press this button here.
Yeah, that's a good point. If your default browser is Internet Explorer, maybe you could try Chrome. Andras, what do you use?
I'm using Edge, but I did briefly test it in Chrome, and Chrome works as well. I think, not to speak anything bad about Internet Explorer, but I think everything should work.
If that's an option for people, if you could, yeah, try and load it in either Chrome or Edge. Good news is plenty of people do seem to have it working. So yeah, another one in Edge says it's working. Had to enable pop-ups. Yeah, that's another thing. So
yes, I did forget to mention, yes. It will ask you whether you would like to block the pop-up. Please allow it. Alternatively, if your settings by default block it, then you may need to just tweak them a little bit to allow pop-ups, because this is a separate window, as you might be able to tell. Alternatively, there might be a button here that flashes red somewhere here when you try to load it that says it's blocked the pop-up. Clicking on it should allow you to enable it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Someone's saying I get more options down the left panel, not just landing page. That's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, I presume what happened is they've clicked go. That's fine.
Someone's keen.
We'll be there shortly as well once we manage to get everyone just on the landing page.
Okay, so in the interest of time, maybe we should.
Yes, I am going to kind of carry on. I'm hoping that the vast majority have managed to get the tool up and running. If there are still people who are struggling, and I'll try and respond to them a little bit in chat.
I'm going to try and share the slide that has the steps for restarting the project, or for starting the project, and hopefully then people can work through that on their own. So yeah.
Yes.
Please carry on.
Yeah, so I am just going to carry on. If someone does need to catch up later, I'll pause again for 3 minutes, and then hopefully things will be looking a little bit better. As I briefly mentioned, I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about terminology. There are a couple of phrases that we've come up with for the ExploreR just to denote a couple of things. The most obvious ones are the population dataset and the analysis dataset. In short, the population dataset just corresponds to whatever data you have loaded. So in practice, this might be your entire integrated care systems. And then the analysis dataset is just some subset of the population dataset that you will actually be working with. So this might be a particular locality or a particular PCN. I have spoken to clinicians who only really cared about who had a particular PCN of interest, and that was all they wanted to know about. So what I'm going to start with is just by actually setting up a new analysis dataset just to show you how it works. So you can see that I have 10,000 individuals in the population dataset. I am going to go and just get rid of some of them. So clicking this button, after a second, puts me onto this screen that's called analysis dataset identification. The way that this page works is that you basically construct statements. For example, by you selecting a field, you then select some operator, and then you select what values of the field you would like to be included. You can select an arbitrary number of these, so you can add new fields, and you have some flexibility over whether you join them, whether you join these clauses by ands or ors. in my particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a data set that's for adults. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select age from this dropdown. I am then going to select the greater than or equal to operator. And then I'm just going to type in 18, minimum age for someone to be included. Analysis data set. Just to clarify, people can click along and do this if they would like. You can just, anyway, when you are done, you could add some more new fields to come up with more complicated definition. In the interest of keeping it simple, I'm just going to click. This would tell me that it has managed to identify 8,060, which is about the proportion that I would expect. And then when I return to the landing page, we can see that the adults, and we can select which data set we'd like to use. It is currently selected for adults, which it tells us has 8,060 individuals, fewer points of activity than the entire population data set. And then when I click go, it will actually load the tool using just the adults from my data set. I am going to, we've landed on the navigation page. We can see that that is the nice data set that we have selected. I am going to pause for a minute here again for two things. First of all, I would like to check if there are still people lagging behind. I can't see the chat, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to rely on you, Anna, to let me know how things are. And the second point that I would like to make is that on the off chance that I am going too quickly, feel free to just unmute yourself and tell me to repeat something or to slow down. I would like to make sure that everything I do is as clear as possible. Sorry, Anna, how are we doing?
So we do have one person who's still not having any luck, but we think it might be an internet connection issue. So if people are still struggling now, there is always the option to access this recording at a later date, and Andros and I will be really happy to answer technical questions offline as well if people do want to have a play with the tool themselves. So hopefully most people are with us now.
Yes, so apologies to anyone who hasn't managed to get this far, but as my colleague said, I am just going to carry on from this point forward. Everyone else who has managed to get loaded up, feel free to click along. You don't have to follow what I'm going to do, but it might make a little bit of sense just to do that so that you can see what I'm talking about. And as mentioned, you can just do it in your time offline if you'd like to take a look after the workshop as well. Just to get back on track, so we've landed on the navigation page. There are about 5 sections to the ExploreR. It's not designed to be a linear process. I could start with any of them, although in my case, I am just going to kind of linearly start at the top with code identification and then work my way downwards to stratification. But really,
we have a risk for we have an ask, sorry, for a slightly slower pace if possible.
I will do my best to be a little bit apologies. Thank you for letting me know. Yes, so as I mentioned, this is not designed to be a linear dashboard. You can jump in between pages as you feel like, but I am just going to go through it, starting at the top and then working my way downwards. The other box on this page that I'm not really going to interact with, but I'm still going to mention, is just the option to edit a collection of variables that we've been calling global groups. In short, they are just a collection of variables that are visible on every page and are generally the first choice that we might recommend for data interrogation. They include long-term condition count or multimorbidity, deprivation, age bands in 10, the ICPs that I've selected, ethnicity, and bridges to health segments. I am not going to edit these. I'm just going to keep what we already have in there. But if someone has some very specific questions, then in theory, they can just select the fields that they are more interested in, and then use them to actually segment the population. I'm going to move on to cohort identification. which should look very similar to what the analysis dataset page look like. This works pretty much in the same way that we select a series of that we can just select a series of statements or clauses, and then we can use them to define a cohort. The difference is that whereas the analysis data set basically a subset of the population for you to look at, cohort identification is designed to split the population in two so that you can compare the statistics of a particular cohort that you're interested in against the rest of the population. Just so that we have, just to once again use this page a little bit, I am going to define a cohort of, say, adults. And then once again, I am going to select age as the field that I'm working on. I am then going to select my greater than or equal to, and then I say cohort. There are a little bit more options for actually how to already had some individuals interested in, then you could upload a CSV file to just automatically load it. You could also download the cohort for later safekeeping. And generally, there is some flexibility in how you choose your values. So for example, there are 5 operators included, equals to in numeric range. So that's, I could set an upper and a lower bound for whatever I've picked, greater than or equal to less than, or basically subsetting a field based on its unique character values. This is basically done to make sure that you use different methods for numeric fields and you use different methods for character fields. Hopefully that is clear. If anyone has any more questions, then please do ask them in chat, and I will let me know. I am, however, just conscious of the time, so I am going to move on to descriptive summaries really quickly and then potentially return to the 20 questions that may arise in a couple minutes.
Yeah, we've got nothing at the moment, so.
Yes, I can just about see, I have 26 as the number of messages, and that hasn't increased, so yeah. A descriptive summaries is pretty much, as the name suggests, a couple of key graphs just to look at the population from a couple of perspectives. In short, there are 6 subpages, each with its own kind of focus. The first one is a population pyramid. The second focuses on multimorbidity or number of long-term conditions. The third is on costs and activity. Fourth is on deprivation. Fifth is on geography. And the sixth is on wider determinants. I am not going to spend too much time on any of these. I'm going to fairly quickly click through them. But in short, most of these pages have their own focus. So the first one here is a population pyramid, which looks somewhat like what we would expect after we removed anyone under 18. You can see that it starts off in the 15 to 19 age band, and that there are far fewer people than there are in the 20 to 24 age band. There are a series of options to either split the data by, so we could be looking at ethnicity. We can see that the majority of our population is white. We could be looking at it with the elderly cohort that we defined. So we can see that this once again splits our data here. The top of the pyramid is the elderly, whereas the rest is just the adults. There are a couple of other miscellaneous options, for example, having separate graphs. So you could have multiple pyramids side by side. You could look at the prevalence of particular clinical conditions. You can also choose whether you would like to look at the count or the percent of the population. Generally, there is some difference in between these pages. So for example, on the clinical characteristics page, you have a choice whether you're interested in the population numbers, your spend, or the activity with respect to the number of long-term conditions. You can further split these bar graphs by, once again, these options that were available on the previous question, that were available on the previous page. Generally, these options are available on every single page, as I mentioned previously. There is also an option to just view the prevalence of particular conditions in the population. The activity overview is looking at spend and activity. You can either subset it in total, or you can look at it on a per capita basis. We can see, just kind of playing around with the options a little bit. Generally, what this page is that you can select the y-axis. Currently, it's set to multimorbidity, whereas the x-axis is the points of delivery that I mentioned previously. So we have 111 community mental health, primary care contact, prescription, secondary, and a total, which is just an aggregation of all of them. Looking at this page briefly, we can get some numbers that are pretty much what we would expect, which is that higher multimorbidity kind of implies higher per head cost, although the total is less by virtue of having far more individuals in the other categories. The remaining 3 pages, deprivation, geography, and wider determinants, follow a fairly similar view, where once again you can select which what it is that you would like to actually have display on the graphs, whether it's population, spend, or activity. Although all of them are on the deprivation page, they are subset by the index of multiple deprivation because that's what I selected. You can then further split each of these bars by the hopefully now familiar fields. For example, elderly. Geography is fairly similar, although this time rather than splitting everything, subsetting by the index of multiple deprivation, we are subsetting by ICPs in the data. You can see that there are some very creative names that I came up with when I was designing the synthetic data set. Same options are present here: population, spend, activity, same fields that you might be interested in subsetting by. Wider determinants are fairly similar, once again, except that this time you can actually choose what goes on the x-axis. Generally, you do have to use deciles because the way the graphing works is that it does it by unique values, and obviously using scores would be a little bit different. But you can just kind of change in between the wider determinant that you're interested in. And once again, you have the same options for what it is that you are interested in, and the same fields for subsetting each of the bars. It looks to me there have been a couple more messages in chat, so I'm going to pause for a minute to see if anyone has any immediate questions, just for 2 minutes. Anna, could you let me know?
Yeah, thanks, Andras. We've got a couple of questions about the graphs themselves. So Wayne has asked, are they made in Plotly?
They are designed with Plotly, yes.
Yes.
Which is a good point that I forgot to mention. In short, for anyone unfamiliar with it, Plotly is a package in R that is used to make graphs. The reason why it's nice is that there are a couple of handy functions here in the top right that you could do. So if you like a graph, you could just download it. You can also, it's not particularly useful here, but you could just focus on, you can just zoom in. There's a couple of other functions. Sorry, Anna, please do.
No, that's great. The other question was actually around downloading images. So could you just talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so almost every graph in the ExploreR is made using Plotly. There are very few that aren't. Generally speaking, what happens is that if you would like to download a graph, you've got 2 options. The first is that Windows has an inbuilt little option, snipping tool, you may have heard of it, which you can literally just select a particular part of the screen and save it as an image. Alternatively, you could use the option that you are supposed to, which is you just click this button here that says download plot as PNG. So if I click it, then apparently it takes a while to take a snapshot, but basically what it will do is it will just give you an option to save the file. You can see that it's downloaded for me. But then this will just save it down to the disk so that you can later view it. Although it is worth mentioning that the interactivity that you normally get with Plotly, so as you can see, I can hover over a particular bar and it will tell you some information about it without me having to actually look on the axes to see the data. That is lost when you actually download it as an image. Do we have any more questions, Anna?
Nope, that's it for now.
Great, yeah. In that case, I am going to move on. if anyone has any more questions, feel free to put them in chat, and then I'll come back to them in just a bit. The next section that I'm going to talk about is segmentation. Obviously, there are really a large number of ways that you could go about doing segmentation. In our case, we have 4 methods that we've implemented. 2 of them are prescribed binning methods, where basically you define what each of your segments is, and then you effectively sort your population into these bins, so to speak. And the other 2 that I'm going to talk about in a little bit are data-driven methods, where you effectively use a little bit of machine learning to try and find the optimal way of clustering individuals. So the first page in segmentation that we've got is a very simple, is really a very simple kind of matrix. Normally you have 3 by 3 options. Effectively what you do is you have 3 options, 3 categories of what age bands you are interested in, and then the multimorbidity or complexity that corresponds to it. So I realize it's a really bad explanation, so just and refresh this page just to see. Basically what this says is it groups people into categories, in this case 0 to 20, 21 to 74. And then it further splits each of these groups by complexity, low, middle, and high. You can set the limits on, as well as what your complexity. You also have some option of selecting either all conditions or just the major or the minor ones, as well as which of them you would actually like to include when doing your multimorbidity measure. And also when I press this button, these segments are all added to the list of variables that we saw earlier, so that if I wanted to go back into the descriptive summaries and say view the activity, I would be able to do that. Regardless, this produces this 3 by 3 matrix, or in some cases, as we saw previously, or 2 by 3 matrix, where it just tells me how many individuals or what population I have in each of these segments, what the total spend is, and the spend per person yearly. We get the approximate pattern that we'd expect, which is that we generally have more people that the population kind of is largely in the low complexity, but as complexity increases, the spend per person also increases. The general structure of these segmentation pages is that at the very top, we have some options or graphs that are relevant only to this particular type of segmentation. And then towards the bottom, we have a tree map and a pie chart that shows the same data by number of individuals or total cost or activity, with the idea that every single segmentation page has these same options to view the segments by number of individuals or total cost, just so that you can compare the various outputs. Moving on to Bridges to Health, which hopefully everyone is familiar with, which is once again a prescribed binning criteria. The definitions that I have been using are here on the right in the bar. Let me just close this. You can scroll down to view the definition that I've been using. If you have a different definition, you can just use a different one, although I'm afraid that this sidebar is currently rather set. Once again, there are some options of what it is that you would like to, actually like to view graphed. So here we just have a single bar of our entire population that is split by the various segments. We can split these segments a little bit more. I am going to just choose elderly as the first example, the cohort that we selected. So we can see that of our elderly, a few smaller proportion are in the healthier segment, and we have far more in the limited reserve or the frailty segment. There are also some options just to view these graphs separately, so that you can compare each of the corresponding segments side by side. or whether you're interested in the total number of individuals rather than the proportion of the total population. At the bottom, once again, we have the same tree map and pie chart. There really isn't much more to say on this page, so I'm just going to carry on to decision trees. But for anyone who would like to just click around, feel free to. I know that I am aware that I'm not exploring all of the options that are available, just because of time pressures. I'm first going to talk about decision trees, which is the first of the data-driven methods that we have implemented. I am first of all going to press go here just to get a plot of the tree, just because it is a little bit easier to visualize what a decision tree is when you actually have this up. So for anyone who may not be familiar with decision trees, it is basically a data-driven technique that takes the entire population. You then tell it what attributes you would like to use, what your target variable is. In this case, we have two options: the cost or the activity. There are a series of hyperparameters that I'm not going to touch on just because it's outside the scope of what the ExploreR is for. And then the tree will basically construct us, as you can tell, this tree starting with the entire population and then splitting it so that it maximizes the discrimination in terms of the target variable. In this particular case, I have selected the total cost. So what it will do is basically split the population so that when we get down here to these leaf nodes, the individuals in each of these nodes have as similar spend as possible, while maximizing the difference in between each of these different leaf nodes. So we can see the rules in a little bit more detail if we tick this box to show rules, that the first segment is defined, that a lot of the segments are defined in terms of repeat polypharmacy and bridges to health, as well as mental health and heart failure, which appear to be the variables of choice that, according to the decision tree algorithm we're using, maximize the discrimination in between them. So we can see that basically it splits the population into everyone who has polypharmacy less than 7. And then everyone else who has more than 7 clearly has a much higher mean spend, although has a far smaller proportion of the population than everyone else. Generally, decision trees are useful for two things, I think. The first is obviously to segment the population using rules that are really, really simple to understand. So if I wanted to, I could really simply turn the definitions here into a prescribed binning category, into kind of the prescribed binning categories that we've been using here in long-term condition by age and bridges to health, because I can really simply just write down what these are, and then later on come back to my data and just maybe manually subset it if need be. The second thing is that it tells us which of the variables are the most useful for actually predicting our total cost, which is our target variable. So basically, what this tells us is that out of all of the attributes in our data, repeat polypharmacy, the bridges to health segmentation, the mental health, and the heart failure fields most accurately cluster our population or just predict their financial needs, really. And that they do it better than any of the other fields. Hopefully that makes more sense. If you would like more information about trees, there are some options here on the right to actually explain how tree-based models work or why you might be interested in using them, which really just puts what I just said into words a little bit more, but on paper. At the bottom, we once again have a tree map and the pie chart to once again just visualize what it is that the decision trees plotted for us, or if you are interested in comparing it to their segmentation methods. It might be worth mentioning that these are, as usual, made with Plotly, so you can hover over them to see some numbers. We do also have some options here in the top right if you are more interested in, if you would like to save them down as a PNG or anything like that. The final method that we have is k-means clustering. It is a little, first time I do have to just scroll to the top. So if you'll excuse me for a minute. So k-means clustering, unlike decision trees, doesn't build us the neat tree that we have down here. It basically, what it does is it points, using the attributes that we select here, it visualizes everyone in kind of a high dimensional space and then tries to cluster people together based on the absolute distance that their points are from each other. The general way that this page works is that we first of all run, if there are categorical variables or string, or basically anything that isn't numeric included, then first of all, factor analysis of mixed data is run on the data just to pre-process it, because that converts it to basically numeric basis that the k-means algorithm can then use to just cluster the people. The general options on this page are just to select the attributes that you're interested in. Once again, you can select name as well as how many clusters you want. Then you can, as usually you just click go, and then you receive the hopefully now familiar tree and pie chart that explain, that roughly speaking break down what each of the segments looks like in terms of number of individuals, total cost, or activity. Unlike the decision trees, however, it can be a lot more difficult to actually discern how the clustering works, because generally speaking, the rules that it uses when translated into actual numbers are a lot more complicated than the fairly simple definitions that we have here in decision trees. Hopefully that made some amount of sense. Anna, do we have any questions in chat? Because I am aware that it is now 11. And I think we are going to take a 5-minute break just so that I can rest my voice a little bit and hopefully give people a chance to either catch up or come up with some more questions.
Yeah, no, I think there's nothing that needs addressing urgently. I'm making a note of a few things to bring up at the end. So yeah, I think now's a good point to take a brief break.
All right, in that case, I am going to pause here. Just for a 5-minute break. So I will see everyone in 5 minutes time.
So yeah, just to confirm, we'll be back at 11:10.
Yes, I'll put up a presentation slide that just says that.
And I'll stay monitoring the chat. So if anyone has got anything they want to ask urgently, then give me a shout.
Hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a little bit of a... Yeah, so I just noticed the fact that when I was gone, the window that I was running has closed. So I'm just going to really quickly refresh it. Might have happened to everyone else as well. Yeah, Anna, are you back as well?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, very good. It's just it's really quiet, so I wasn't certain if I had everyone else back as well. Could I ask at least some people who are back in chat just to let me know that they have returned?
I think we just carry on.
Yeah, okay, cool. So as I mentioned, the window kind of crashed while I was gone. Hopefully people had the common sense to not go AFK like I did for 5 minutes. Regardless, if you did in fact lose the window and are just restarting, it might be worth mentioning that the option that you selected in terms of the analytics data set will have been added to this dropdown. So you can just really simply select it and then click go again to jump back into where we were. The only option is that the cohorts that I've made and the segmentation options didn't persist over restarting the tool. So we could add them back in, but I personally will not be doing that just because there isn't much of a point seeing as we already visited them. Yeah, so we left off at the end of segmentation. So I'm going to start off with theoplots or theographs For anyone who is unfamiliar with them, they are basically a patient-level graph that tells us about an individual's individual points of activity in the system. So on my screen, you can see that we have the various points of delivery, and then we have the time going along the x-axis, and we can see that this individual selected has had somewhat regular GP care contact with quite a bit of a gap here, then a couple more, and has been taking prescriptions every couple of months. Now, I'm aware that this graph here is randomly sampled from the population each time it's run, which means that there might be a couple of people who have a graph that looks almost empty. So the first thing that I would recommend is that you come here on the left, and then on the left here, you select, say, 5, 6, and 7 from this dropdown, and then just click to resample again, just so that you get a graph with a lot more activity that might be a little bit more interesting to talk about. Yeah, so effectively, theoplots are designed as a tool to look at an individual's pathway with the healthcare, and in the case of group or aggregate theoplots, which are the second tab that I will be talking about in a while as well, to basically let the user compare the experience of multiple patients. The only other thing that I'm going to mention really briefly is that unlike on most pages where you have a box here on the right-hand side, we couldn't quite fit it. So instead, I've got an expandable box here that has some more information. Generally speaking, the way that the theoplots look like is that you can select the data range that you are interested in. Please note that this dataset only contains 2 years of activity. So if you do go back further than 2019 November, you're just going to get some white space because there shouldn't be any more activity. Once you've done that, you can then choose how you would like to sample your individual. The first option is the couple of fields that you may be familiar with because they've been on every single page that we keep calling global groups. You can select one of the fields, and then you can then select which of its unique values you would like people from. So if I were to select everything, then I would be sampling my entire population, whereas currently I've limited it to those with 5 to 7 5 to 7 concurrent clinical conditions. Other options include filtering by age and just long-term conditions, which is probably a little bit simpler to understand. You just slide these along a little bit and then click go. Or alternatively, there is an option that you just upload IDs in a CSV file and then just view the individuals that you've uploaded. Once you've clicked go, the graph will then sample someone from the data, and it will then plot them. You can see that the new individual that I've sampled has a lot more points of activity than the previous one. You can hover over these points. So because this is still made with Plotly, you can hover over these points to see some more information about them. So you can see the arrival, the departure, the various points of delivery levels that we have. So we can see that this is a repeat primary care prescription of sorts. We also have some information about the specialty, assuming that it's known, and then we also have some information about how much the individual point cost. Another option that we have available is that if we don't want to view a particular type of activity, we can either expand it here, but generally speaking, unticking this graph will just remove it. So you can see that I unticked one. So now I'm only looking at community through to secondary care and not any one-on-one activity, which we didn't have any of anyway. But generally speaking, you can use this option to filter what it is that you would like to use to very particular activity types. Feel free to play around with it to just expand it a little bit and just see what subcategories are available. But generally, this is but in these dropdowns is where we use the points of delivery that I mentioned in the brief presentation at the start to just basically focus down into very particular types of activity that we might want to know about, more about. So in addition to the graph, we also have some information about the individual's attributes. This is generally just to give some context about why they might be having the type of activity that they have. So in particular, we can see that this individual who lives in a fairly deprived area has three minor long-term conditions: hypertension, asthma, and diabetes, and in addition also has depression and mental health. So this is what a single person's theoplot looks like. We also have a group theoplot that, assuming that everyone is clear with this page, I am going to move on to demonstrate as well, which is a little bit different because what it does is it lets us plot multiple people. So you can see that first of all, there is no default graph. I am going to really quickly show you how to make one. We have some very similar options here on the left. Once again, you can select the date, you can select what values of the, you can once again kind of filter the population by some categories. So I'm going to once again select 5, 6, and 7 from this drop down just to make sure there is plenty of activity that I will be plotting. I recommend that anyone following along also does this. The only difference is that this time we can specify how many individuals we would like to sample. I am just going to leave this as 20, which seems like a nice round number. However, first, before we can actually plot it, we have to go into options and select the activity types that we are interested in. Previously, you would just kind of look at everything that an individual had, but the group theoplots are designed to really try and look at particular pathways. So for example, here in the BNSSG, we've used them to look at the general journey of individuals who have, for example, suffered a stroke, and generally kind of try and tease out differences in care of how an individual who has received follow-up care, just how much of a difference has that actually made in terms of subsequent emergency admissions. I'm not going to do anything particularly complicated, but there are plenty of options for which of the subcategories you might be interested in. All I'm going to do is select primary care contact and secondary, just without expanding the tree. This will also select all subcategories. If I wanted to get rid of them, I would have to expand it and then untick it. This table here on the right is used to define the colors that I would like to plot, that I would like to use the graph to plot. So I am going to just make sure that I've only got 2 rows, because this means that all of the subcategories will then be colored the same as the primary one. So all subcategories of secondary will be just using the color. I'm going to make it blue for no apparent reason. But then all of my primary care contact will be in black, and then all of my secondary care will be in blue. Now, if I go here and tell it to go, it will take a little bit of time to actually fetch the data, which can take a lot longer if you are plotting more than 20 individuals. And then it will plot me a graph of all of these individuals. You can see that no one has been excluded for lack of recorded activity, mostly thanks to the fact that I selected only individuals with high multimorbidity. And then this gives us this graph, which is a little bit similar to the single person in terms of you have the time running along the x-axis. However, this time, rather than having points of delivery, we have each individual. So you can see that all of their points of activity, regardless of the type, are condensed into this single row. Some of them have more than others, that much is obvious, but really but the colors can be used to basically tell apart different activity types. In the case where we have these lines going across, that generally means that the lines basically denote a longer stay. For example, a longer inpatient point of activity. You can hover over the points to tell the difference between arrival and departure date. So for example, with the current point that I'm hovering over, you can see that there has been 2 months of difference in between the departure and the arrival. We once again have the exact same information on the pop-up that appears when I hover on the text, just the arrival, departure dates, the various points of delivery, the specialty, and the cost, which we can see has been quite high for this inpatient non-elective. This graph is also still made with Plotly, so you can save it down. I am aware that there has been a question Someone asked as to whether it's possible to preserve the kind of interactivity. I'm afraid that it's not as far as I know, because the wrapper that I'm using in R to actually create these graphs doesn't quite allow it. It just lets it just lets you download it as a PNG, which doesn't keep any of the interactivity. I am going to pause here again for some questions. And could I ask you to keep an eye on chat for me to see if people are asking anything?
Yeah, we don't have anything currently.
I'm just going to give it a minute anyway. And then we'll see where we are.
Just around that, that idea of being able to download interactive plots in Plotly format. Maybe it's worth us having a little look to see if that is possible. Sometimes there's a workaround that allows you to do that through Shiny. So I've made a note. If that's something that people would find really useful to have an interactive download, we can certainly look into it. But currently we don't know whether that's possible or not.
Well, we have a survey at the end, which I think would be a good point for feedback.
So nothing is coming up in the chat. So if anyone does have any questions around the Theo plots, we can always cover them at the end as well.
Yes, at the very end, we will open to questions about any part of the workshop, not just the very last sections.
So Matthew has just said, when I select long-term conditions to split the wider determinants, it showed age bands rather than long-term conditions, I guess.
Sorry, which field was it?
So when I selected long-term conditions, yeah, it showed age bands. Okay, that's interesting.
Unusual. Not really sure what might be causing it.
Oh, in the descriptive summary, sorry.
Oh, in the descriptive summaries.
Okay.
So long-term condition. Let's come here. And
let's come back to this.
And
we can just make a note to check this ourselves.
Yeah, we'll have to look at it, but
I've made a note.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if maybe here.
Yeah, Matthew, if you could just specify exactly what page you're seeing it on. I'm
not really sure how to replicate it, so I'm afraid you need to give me a little bit more information.
Yeah, no, that's fine. He's going to do that.
So I think a general point we'd like to make here is that as some of you may be able to tell, this isn't a finished product. It's still in development. We will also like to just mention the fact that generally, depending on the environment that you run it in, there might be a couple of difficulties. So it runs differently on my computer compared to the Archidoo Cloud, which is once again different to the local server that we were using to host the application, just generally around the CCG. It might be, so we are still working on ironing out some of these problems. But generally, the setup itself might sometimes be quick, might sometimes be a little bit more complicated just based on the exact environment where the program is going to be running from. Do we have any more questions that, Anna, that might be?
No, nothing. Just to say that when we do roll this out, both Andras and I will be available by email to help troubleshoot. So yeah, not to worry too much about that at this point.
Assuming no more questions, I am going to move on to the stratification and generally move on with the workshop. So the last section in the tool is risk stratification, which basically is a method to use the attributes of an individual to predict either the likelihood of them having activity, or their expected activity count, or their expected cost over some of the activity over some or all of their kind of yearly activity. So this page is a little complicated to explain. So what I'm going to do is I am going to first of all just go through the options and try and explain what the output is. So the output of this page is I am going to really quickly run it just using the default options and kind of go from there in terms of what it is that we get. So we get 4 graphs that I'm going to largely ignore, or rather 4 outputs. What I'm going to talk about is this at the bottom. So the output of the risk stratification page is a new field that ranks everyone in the population into groups 1 to 10, where basically 1 is the least risk and 10 is the highest risk, or so to speak, of them having the activity or the costs of the particular type. So basically this is unlike segmentation, which but it is somewhat similar to segmentation insofar as it basically tries to group people who have a similar expected activity or cost and tries to group them into these groups of 1 to 10, where 10 is predicted to be the highest user. This particular point isn't very good because basically the likelihood of activity returns a probability that a given individual will have any form of activity. I've currently got all of it selected. So basically what this will do is return everything in kind of the interval 1 to 0, 0 to 1. Now you can see that this is just the testing, this is the graph of the testing data against the prediction of the model. So you can see that we have quite a lot of predictions of ones, which doesn't really translate particularly well into these risk groups. So that's the first option, is to basically predict the probability of someone having activity. The other 2 options will be to either predict the activity count or the activity cost. I'm just going to switch to cost and run it again. The reason I'm doing it in this order is because the expected activity count or the expected costs builds on this likelihood of activity option. So in this particular case, once again, we still have the same option of basically trying to predict whether an individual will have activity. However, this time anyone that the model predicts will have activity, it will then make an effort to basically actually predict the predict the number for them, and then based on those numbers try and split them into groups. So you can see that previously we had an expected probability of 0 to 1, whereas this time, because we are predicting cost, we have groups 1 to 10, with 10 being kind of ranging over quite a much larger range, with almost with 994 pounds being the expected highest value. And you can actually see that you can actually see the difference in between these groups as the mean expected cost for each of them increases. Generally, the general idea of this page is to try and be a little bit more flexible about what it is that we would actually like to predict. Hopefully people are generally clear with the idea of these 1 to 10 risk groups. In short, what we are interested in is anything from actually using it to predict kind of the overall is to basically try and fit a model to the entire population, and then based on that model, try and make predictions about just generally what it is that we, based on their attributes, will be expecting their profile to look like, say, in the next year, because we are using one year of historic activity to actually make the predictions. This idea of risk stratification kind of also ties in with some of the previous work that we've done here at the NSSG, some of which has been to basically try and predict the probability of an unexpected emergency admission. So for example, the way that you would be trying to set that up in this part on this page would be select likelihood of activity, and then unselect every single option with that isn't say A and D, and then run this algorithm using just A and D to try and basically stratify the population into finding those who are at most risk of actually being admitted. I realize that this is still a somewhat more complicated page, and it is probably the one that that is still the most in development per se. So any feedback on it is welcome. But the general kind of series of outputs that we get, I will also talk through now. So first of all, there is some information about how many data points are excluded because of missing values. That is what NAs are. We then get some information about the logistic regression, which is always run regardless of what the output is, as I mentioned, because the prediction of, so generally speaking, there are two models running in the background. The first is a logistic regression that is used to predict the probability of an individual actually having activity. And then the second option is, then the second model only runs when we select the expected activity count or the expected costs, in which case a linear regression model is basically trained on the individuals who are predicted to have activity, mostly in the interest of actually producing a model that would then accurately describe the proportion of the population that has most of the activity. This is mostly done to exclude outliers or individuals who have had very few points of activity who might skew the model a little bit. Outputs kind of generally include an ROC curve, which is used to generally select which is generally used to try and work out where to set a threshold for the logistic regression. You can see that at the moment, what I'm saying is that anyone who, this is the value that I set here. And what this is saying is that only individuals who are predicted at least 0.5 in terms of probability are used to train my linear regression. By changing this number, we can basically control how sensitive we are to the minimum number of activity points that are in the data and what proportion of the population we actually use to model the linear regression, which is then used to produce the expected activity count or activity count or activity cost that we'll be expecting to see from them. Anna, do we have any questions so far in chat about how this page works? I am just going to pause here because I think it might be a little better if I try to answer specific questions rather than just continue to talk over what the page is about.
We just had a couple of questions about the outputs.
Yeah.
So is it possible to view the regression coefficients?
It isn't that
one question.
I'm afraid.
So when you download the model, does that doesn't give you access to the coefficient?
I think that does give us. So that is why those buttons exist, is to try and get access to the coefficients. The only difficulty with that might be is that they are R files that it downloads, so you would have to view them in R rather than. So those specifically give you the models that are used in the code itself that it builds rather than a summary of them.
Okay, great. And then presumably within those files, you will also have a p-value for the model, I would imagine.
I assume so.
We can check
Afraid
that.
I can't actually give you a concrete answer to that one because it's been a while since I've looked at the outputs, but yes, I will say yes purely because it is model is in
Yeah,
there,
from
so
my
the relevant
experience
values
of-
should be in there, yes.
From my experience of making regression models in R, that all of those outputs should be there. We can check that explicitly at some point. I think that was it. I seem to have lost access to the chat. I think that's, have you? Oh no, why can't I access the chat? Yeah, I think that's everything for now.
All right, well, in that case, if anyone has any questions about this page, please do put it in chat now, really. Although I think we just move on to finishing up, seeing as we don't really have many questions, right, Anna?
Yes, for this section, we have some sort of more general questions.
Okay. So I'm not seeing the number of unread messages in chat increase. So I'm going to assume that there are no more questions for this section. If there are, we can always come back to them. So what I'm going to do is basically move on to the end, which is just to open, basically, I think I'll be answering any general question from now on. However, before we do that, we mentioned at the beginning that there is a survey that we would really like everyone to fill out. Do you have the link to that, Anna?
Sorry, difficulty multitasking. Yes, so I'm just going to put the link to the survey.
So I mentioned, mentioned at the very start, there is a link survey that is very simple. It's just a couple of multiple choice questions, really 5 minutes. So we still have 20 minutes left of the workshop. I'd like to ask everyone to mention we'll be using it to just generally use the feedback to try and improve. Who is very interested in obtaining it and then setting up the ExploreR. However, while everyone hopefully fills out the survey, I am going to just answer any questions about any part of the tool that you may have or the project in general.
I'm just going to throw out as a little bit of an incentive as well to filling out the survey. There's an option on there to include your email address so that we can contact you if you'd like to be involved in helping us just with the final stages of development. And obviously this would also mean that you had access to the tool to use. So if that helps to get more people to fill out the survey, then that would be brilliant. So whilst people are doing that, I'll maybe try and summarize some of the questions. There's not been a huge number, so
we can go through them. I think they have the
if
time.
anyone does have any more. So there's been a couple around data formatting,
Yes.
and we know that this is we anticipated that this would be something that people would have questions about. So we've actually put together a specific information pack on data formatting. So I'm also going to paste the link to our GitHub for this project, which has all of the materials from today, and also I think, Andreas, is that correct? It also has the data.
I will have to double check, but it should in theory have it, yes.
If it doesn't have it yet, it will do soon. So
yes,
hopefully all questions around data formatting are answered in that. We will be updating that as we go as well, based on feedback. So if anyone has specific questions about formatting their own data set for use in the tool, then please do get in touch.
Alternatively, I could try to answer some of those questions. Any other questions we have?
And the other thing is, if people do want to access the tool to use outside of this session, this particular version of the tool, that's also available on the GitHub page, with the caveat that obviously this isn't the final release. So there might be some kinks that need ironing out. Just seeing another question come up. is the project released under a specific open source license? I wouldn't want to misuse it with a private.
Very good question.
Yeah.
The answer is I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware at the moment, you are, any part of the code that you would like to take, you are more than welcome to, so long as you don't hold us accountable for anything. But I'm not sure if there is a specific agreement that I said that was agreed upon with the Health Foundation. But as far as I know, or at the moment at least, what we're saying is that you can take, everyone is welcome to it. If you only want a little bit of the code, you can just take a little bit of the code. Just please don't hold us accountable for anything that, for any unusual behavior that may occur with it. But generally, we just encourage anyone to, if they have anything that they would like to use, to just do that.
We had another question around memory use. So yeah, could you speak a little bit about how the tool fares in terms of CPU and RAM usage?
Well, I can. So generally speaking, the more individuals you would like to try and put into your data set, the more RAM you're going to use. So I have historically been testing it on most of our system-wide data sets. So I've been using about 900,000 individuals with, I think, 40, 50 fields. Generally speaking, what I found is that it is kind of recommended that every now and then you restart the program. I'm not really sure what specs to recommend for it. I have been just using a laptop that isn't. I don't think it's a new one. I think it's an older one, and it has been more or less able to keep up with the workload. Although sometimes the loading times are a little bit longer. I would strongly recommend that. Well, the more people you would like to be loading into the tool as a population data set, the kind of more RAM you have. So I would recommend kind of an 8 gigabytes as a minimum. But I'm afraid that at the moment I haven't really done particularly much on benchmarking it. Although all I will say is that sometimes it might take a couple of seconds for things to load if you're using a particularly large data set. If you have a more yeah, so generally speaking, I haven't had too many problems with memory. Although in the event that you do end up running this offline, I would recommend that you do occasionally just restart it. But generally speaking, I have found it to be fairly good at just running for long times without much of a memory leak. I'm hoping that answers the question I'm just hoping that answers your question. Do we have any response for that?
Not specifically to that question. Does anyone else have any more general questions? I'm going to put my email address and András's email address in the chat, so that if you do have specific technical questions, you can get in touch with us. That's a good question as well. So if you are running the app as a standalone app, so
no, the crashing after inactivity is an RStudio Cloud only event that occurs. I can confirm that when running offline, it is much more stable.
That would be quite frustrating.
Yes, as I mentioned, there are a couple of odd little bits of behavior when you change platform. And I think that the inactivity is kind of an RStudio Cloud only bit of behavior that occurs.
Okay, so nothing else is coming through.
Yeah.
So I've put the email addresses in the chat. There should be a link to the GitHub page and the SurveyMonkey questionnaire. So
Yeah, so thank you
yeah,
for coming. Please do fill out that survey because we would really like the feedback. And as Anna mentioned, we are going to make a note of anyone who puts their email addresses down so that we can get in contact with them to try and get them set up as quickly as possible if they are interested. Otherwise, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to stay on. But generally, thank you for coming and for attending our workshop.
yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you so much both for that really informative workshop. I'm just going to end the recording now.